Signature Bank Studios.
Insert Democrat socialist here.
Runs the Democratic House floor for 30 plus years running. He's promising this and he's stealing that. Where can you get that kind of money? He's using your house like his own piggy bank. You ought to know by now. You can pay off your house here in Illinois, but you can never keep up with the taxes. Oh, it's always been the plan to have a taxpayer pay, no doubt. Not a matter of if anymore, but when. You're moving out. I said, when you're moving out.
Top of the morning, Dan Proft here. That theme music means it's time for our weekly conversation with Ted Dabrowski about all things Illinois policy related. Let's talk about K through 12 a little bit. Roland Fryer, Harvard economist, economics professor at Harvard. He's one of those guys, anything that he writes or any studies he produces, you want to pay attention to. The Economics of Education Reform, his piece in the Journal. In Houston, a research project I led called Apollo 20 showed it was possible to erase the racial achievement gap in less than 2 years by applying simple reform principles to the worst performing schools. Today, the tools we use sit on the shelf, not because they fail, but because leaders fail to act. (2012) Dateline. My graduate student Will Dobby and I collected unprecedented data from nearly 50 New York City charter schools to see what practices truly boosted student learning. Class size and teacher credentials, political obsessions for decades, mattered little. Class size. And it's all, even to the extent that class size is marginally impactful, we've got it all wrong in terms of where class sizes should be smaller versus where they can be bigger without impact. And we've got it flipped where they should, in terms of the class sizes in grade school versus high school. Of course we do. Central planning. But anyway, back to Fryer. What he found. Best practices. What mattered most were 5 concrete replicable practices. 1, more instruction time. 2, high expectations. 3, frequent teacher feedback. 4, data-driven instruction. And 5, high-dosage tutoring. Together, he writes, these 5 tenets explain roughly half the difference between effective and ineffective schools. 2012. In Houston, at the time, Superintendent Terry Greer opened the door to Roland Fryer's research and these 5 tenets I just mentioned, his 5 tenets. Together, he writes, we applied the 5 tenets in 20 struggling public schools serving nearly 20,000 students. We lengthened the school year by 20%, brought in hundreds of tutors, replaced 95% of principals and half the teachers while retraining the rest, embedded data into instruction, and built a culture of high expectations. The results were astonishing. In elementary school math, students gained the equivalent of 4 extra months of learning a year, enough to erase the racial achievement gap in less than 2 years if we implemented these practices in the lowest performing half of schools nationwide. Eliminate the racial achievement gap in 2 years. In secondary schools, where skeptics said reform was impossible, students gained nearly 8 additional months of learning in a 9-month school year. By 2013, the Apollo program, as he called it, started in 2012. By 2013, it was finished. Not despite its success, but because of it. If you had told me in 2010 that we would close the racial achievement gap in math in under 2 years, I would have laughed at you, but we did. Even so, the funding was pulled from the schools because they were no longer the worst in the district, and they predictably backslid. This fall, he writes, Professor Fryer, millions of children are walking into schools that still bear the scars of COVID and our abandonment of real reform. Average math scores are lower than they were 2 decades ago. Reading scores have flatlined. Black and Hispanic students lost the most ground. The nation is facing the largest educational crisis in a generation. And that isn't even the real tragedy. The tragedy is we already know what works. high dosage tutoring, extended learning time, relentless use of data and feedback, and refusing to accept the soft bigotry of low expectations. Those aren't theories. They're proven. They worked in Houston. They worked in Denver. They can work anywhere if we have leaders with the courage to act. By the way, I should mention Roland Fryer, if you're not familiar with him, is a black gentleman. That's not important other than for the identitarians listening that this is not some, honky in an ivory tower that is telling, all of these urban central planners, mayors, and teachers unions and CP and school boards that know better. But because they're down with the struggle. These are our kids, as Stacey Davis Gates says. Yeah. Well, you're not going to be able to play that card on Roland Fryer. Sorry. But in terms of what works and and bringing back what he achieved in Houston with cooperation with the school district to places like Chicago and quickly, not just Chicago, a lot of mediocre to less than mediocre suburban school districts too, could be done. Or we can just continue to throw money at these schools and, as you heard from Jeannie Ives' commentary, liquidate people's homes through confiscatory property taxation to achieve nothing, as per the reading and math scores statewide under Pritzker. Ted Dabrowski, thanks for joining us as always. Appreciate it.
Good morning, Dan. I mean, there's so much there in terms of just you start with culture of high expectations. That's a starting point. You demand something more and better than what you've been doing, and it's been a mess in our schools for, as I said, 50 years now at least. And start with culture of high expectations, and you're going to get big changes. Well,
and the other thing too is just again, somebody has to be honest and I guess politically courageous enough to say, all of this backslapping ourselves because we spend, we're always in the top 10 in total spending per pupil on K through 12.
That's right.
We're also, I think, top in the country at the higher education level in spending per pupil. And again, I'm sorry, what do we have to show for it? And, at the university level, let's talk about the university level in addition to K through 12 as well, with the prices that are being charged, the debt loads kids are coming out with, particularly from schools that, that they shouldn't even be open, like Chicago State, frankly. But I digress. It's just this idea that you watch politicians congratulate themselves for spending more of other people's money to no effect, and in some cases to negative effect.
Well, and I think that's it's a big problem in a lot of states. It's probably the biggest here in Illinois and a couple other states, and that's because we've been taken over by the teachers unions, and in particular the Chicago Teachers Union, and so you've got the back scratching between the politicians and the unions, and it's created a whole complex, right? And that's why they don't talk about the real metrics. They will never talk about reading levels. They will talk about how much they spend and how many kids graduate. You can graduate any kid you want, right, just by changing the rules. So they graduate, 80, 90% of kids. They're spending, it's CPS now. It will be $33,000 next year. It'll be $33,000 a kid, and the media will parrot it, and that's why
spending goes and as CPS. Generally speaking, as people flee this state and higher ed, spending going up while enrollment going down.
Yeah, and that's it's a function of both, right? More and more spending, fewer students. And it's happening in higher ed as well. So this is what's happening, and the media parrots the same things about high graduation rates and big spending, and places like U.S. News rank Illinois high for education because we spend a lot. But I think, Roland Fryer, by the way, is great. He's awesome. And, just his focus on things like data-driven instruction, right, and high-dosage tutoring. I need to tell a positive story about one of the best schools in Illinois, and it revolves around this. And I haven't talked about it, and I've never written about it, but I need to, and I will really praise what they do. Down there near East St. Louis, there's a few school districts: Aviston, Bartelso. These are small towns. Let's call it blue collar, working class people. Largely white. But they have had this is before COVID. They had the highest scores in Illinois in reading, 85%. And what's amazing about there is they were spending about $8,000 a student, so it was among the lowest in the state in spending, and they had the highest.
85% of kids are reading at grade level.
Yeah, that was before COVID.
Before COVID.
Now they're 75 or something like that. So they're not doing as well post COVID, but number one in the state, Aviston and Bartelso, number one and number two, and I think they were like the bottom two in spending. And so, I went down there because I couldn't believe it. Yeah. So, my colleague and I drove down there. We met the school, and what you found is a culture of high expectation. These people said we're competitive, we like to do well, and you could feel it in the school. And and they said if they had any problems, the community came in to help. It's fascinating, and they're doing it with little money. And they said we do what we can with what we have. And it's a fascinating story. It should be plastered all over the state that you can do really well with little money.
Yeah, and the soft bigotry of low expectations, that phrase that's been around for a long time because it's so descriptive. The way it manifests itself is like, what does that mean? They don't have a culture of excellence, or they don't have high expectations. What it means is no excuses. They don't spend their time making excuses, blaming who's ever in the White House or blaming outside forces, or they just, this is what we have to get done and we're going to get it done. I mean, that's what you see from schools that are doing well versus schools that are not.
Yeah. Well, and they're not victims, right? I mean, I think you start with that. You're not a victim. You actually have power to learn. And of course, like you say, the human capital, the teachers, the leaders, they lead that. And if they can create an environment where, hey, we can do well. I mean, I remember this my parents did with me, right? You create a culture of expectation, of excellence, hard work, and you can get there. It's, of course it's not easy, but that's, nothing good is easy. But I saw this in those schools, and it's fascinating. It's great.
Ted Dabrowski, all things Illinois policy related. Thanks as always, Ted. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan.
And he joined us on the Turnkey.Pro answer line.
Hear about the big stories of the day, then talk about them right here on Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer. Gain insight into building strong marriages and raising godly children with Focus on the Family with Jim Daly each weekday at 11:30 a.m. on our sister station, AM 1160.